All right, we want to respect everyone's time, so we are going to get kicked off. Welcome to our monthly webinar. We do these on the third Tuesday of every month. They are recorded and posted to our YouTube channel, so be sure to check that out as well. You can access through the website. You go to papertrails.com and then go to resources. All of the historical ones are in there. So today we're going to talk about how to conduct a successful interview. I have with me today Art Boulay and Alyssa Currit from Strategic Talent Management. They are wonderful partners of ours and clients as well. And they've really helped us in our growth the last year or so. And, Art and Alyssa have put together a ton of content and helped us. So welcome, Art and Alyssa. You want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure, I'll let Alyssa start because this is really her show. I'm just here for looks.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I am an account executive at Strategic Talent Management. So one thing about us is we use assessments, which are like our secret weapon in all of the work that we do with our clients. And I'm mainly responsible for interpreting and presenting results to our clients. And Art?
I am Art Boulay, the CEO and one of the founders of STM. I won't tell you exactly when we found it, but we did. And today I'm here really to support Alyssa. This is a great program she's put together, and I'll contribute a few stories here and there.
Thank you.
I'm going to let you kick things off, Alyssa, and you let me know when you need me to advance slides.
Okay, thanks. So what we're going to be talking about today is interviewing, but particularly a structured interviewing approach. So we'll get started by talking about why this approach matters, why it has been tried and true, and what makes it so successful. What does it look like in practice? And we'll also be giving some general best practices around interviewing. So if you have any questions at any time, feel free to raise a hand, drop something in the chat. I'll also pause throughout to ask for some questions as well. But I wanted to get started because this is always fun to hear from other people. Does anybody have a weird interview question that they've ever been asked, or maybe a interview experience that has been just seared into their brain, maybe because it was so fantastic or so not fantastic? If anybody has something that they would like to share, we would love to hear.
Yeah, and feel free to just put your hand up in the chat or ask the question in the chat. We're checking it all out. So not seeing anything right off the bat, Alyssa, but if I do, I'll let you know.
All right, be thinking about that as we go
along. I'll just contribute my favorite all-time weird question. I was once on a panel and people were talking about interview questions, and they said, oh, my favorite interview question is to ask people how they organize the clothes in their closet. And the key was, when you ask a question like that, it may be a great question, but there has to be a right answer. And of course, there is no right answer to organizing your closet. So that's kind of one of the secrets of getting non-weird questions. You know what the answer needs to be.
Yeah, and that's definitely important when we talk about the structured approach. So if nobody has anything to share right now, hopefully that's because you've all had amazing interviews and you've never had a curveball question like that. So Chris, we can go ahead and get started then. So why do we like the structured interviewing approach? Well, for starters, this approach has been very heavily researched. It has been scientifically proven that it accurately measures a person's fit to a certain job when done correctly. It can reduce bias. Bias is something that can have such a negative impact on making a right hire or not. And oftentimes we have what we call a behavioral bias, in which you're really judging candidates based on their behavior and the way that they present themselves. And, maybe if somebody is super friendly and outgoing, you're going to love them and you're going to want to hire them, and you're going to think that they're, by default, because they're so nice and lovely, going to excel at the job, when in reality that's not the case. That's just the surface. And so structured interviewing really keeps people on track and able to look past these biases that can really lead us astray when it comes to hiring. And by default, you're more likely to make better hiring decisions. And especially if you have multiple interviewers, if you use this approach, you're going to be in better agreement across all of you by following this approach. And all of this will make sense why as we
And I'll just,
get into things. But
I'll just chime in on that last point. Is we had a before and after situation by accident. One of my clients invited me to always invites me to participate in their interviews, and I did. And at the end of the interview, the people were all over the place. The interviewers were all over the place about whether this was a good candidate, not a good candidate, how good they were. They did Alyssa's structured interview program and really took it to heart, and they did an amazing job with it. What I wasn't expecting is at the end of an interview where they use these structured techniques, everybody was in agreement within a reasonable range, and the discussion then could proceed on more useful topics than how far apart we all were on our judgments. So that part is really very important, quickly getting to agreement across multiple interviewers.
yeah, it's great to have multiple interviewers for many different reasons, but it can be really challenging when you end the interview and nobody's on the same page. So, okay, we can move on, Chris. So just a general overview of what an ideal interview should look like. This may or may not be news to people, but typically in the beginning, you offer a short introduction. Of course, you thank them for their interest and for being here. This is where you would want to give them some idea of what to expect out of the interview. How long do you anticipate it being? I'm going to ask you questions about your experience and fit for the job, things like that. Then the bulk of the interview should really be you asking specifically behavioral and situational questions that are related to the job. And if you're not familiar with behavioral and situational questions, they're basically questions that elicit information about a candidate's past experience, and they typically take on the form of, tell me about a time when. And situational questions elicit information about future performance or anticipated performance. And so they're more hypothetical in nature and typically take the form of, what would you do if? And then you would insert a situation. Of course, all related to the job for which they're applying. And after the question and answer session, the last 15 minutes or so, you would want to give the candidate a chance to ask you questions. And then you can really wrap it up with things like salary, availability, and the nitty-gritty stuff. Okay, so this is where we get into the structured components of interviewing. And this can go, we could spend 2 hours talking about this, and we do offer a more in-depth training course, but just keeping it high level for time's sake here. The key elements of interview structure are expectations, questions, and response ratings. So before you can even think of interviewing somebody for a job, you really need to know what it is that you expect from this person. And expectations are different from job descriptions, because job descriptions, are often a laundry list of, these are all the tasks and duties you're responsible for. And while that is certainly relevant, the person needs to have the technical skills to do the job, the expectations might go deeper. Are they a big picture thinker? Are they systematic? Are they organized? Things like that. And you can certainly create questions to elicit that information about a candidate. So really going into it with your expectations laid out, I would say the top 5 or 6, just for time's sake, should really be the focus of the interview. And Art, you looked like you were going to chime in.
Yeah, I was
there.
going to say, the only thing I would add to that is expectations really are different from job descriptions, and you need both. But expectations might be things like in a job description, it might mention teamwork, but in expectations, you might want to be more specific. I need you to work very closely with this team, a remote team, for example, and it's very important to us that everybody stay in regular contact. Those kind of details are things that you might expect and just assume everybody else expects too, but this is where the behavioral bias comes in, because not everybody is going to think about the same exact qualities that you're thinking about. So you really need to explain them, and it's these expectations that are ultimately the most important factor of forming a powerful interview and frankly managing the person once they're hired.
Definitely. So once you have your expectations listed out and the key ones that you want to focus on in the interview, the aim is that you create questions specifically related to those predetermined expectations. And a good rule of thumb that we like to follow is to create one behavioral and one situational interview question related to each specific expectation. So this is why I say you have to really prioritize them. You don't have time to, ask 20 interview questions for 10 expectations. So you have your expectations, you have your questions, and this is all predetermined. This is all planned. This is all
Written
laid
out.
out prior to the interview. So we also have a form that basically follows this structure. You have your job title, you have your expectations, your interview questions, and the third piece is response evaluation criteria. So you need to know what you want to hear from the person you're interviewing. What is an acceptable answer? What is an answer that's just not going to fly? And this must also be written out in advance, because as you're going, you need to reference this so that you can more objectively say, oh yeah, I really like this person, but before I met them, I knew that they needed to have X, Y, and Z when they talked about this, when they talk about teamwork or whatever it is.
So Alyssa, are you saying that planning is required before an interview?
Absolutely. And this is also what helps everybody, if you have multiple interviewers, it helps everybody stay on the same page. You're just so much more objective about it because you have it in front of you. It was predetermined. You're not being influenced by the candidate and their lovely personality. So yeah, typically we like to have 3, like a low, medium, and high rating, and just some bullets of criteria, when you ask them about their process for doing a certain thing, for writing a blog, well, they need to do A, B, and C because that's generally the process we follow. If they do all of that, great. They're a winner in my book. Maybe they tick 2 out of the 3, and that's okay. That's fine. We can teach them the third, but in an ideal world, they would do all 3. And then maybe the low response rating would be has no plan, has no process, maybe has never even written a blog in their life.
And I would just add to that, one of my favorite criteria for a good answer to any question like that is specificity. They're so specific. You can see exactly what they're talking about. You can grasp it and understand it. Vague and general answers generally get a low from me because it tells me the person really hasn't figured it out or doesn't really understand the whole process. They're just kind of winging it.
So let's get into some examples to try to help illustrate this a little bit better. If you've, by this point, determined that a candidate has the ability to do the job, so, you've gone through all of the technical stuff, we're going to illustrate interview structure with some examples about energy and drive. Now, this is a criteria on its own, and this is our sort of secret weapon, because a lot of people ask questions about, well, what do you want to do in the future? Why do you want this job? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? But they don't know why they're asking it, and they certainly don't know what they want to hear. So for us, energy and drive is what can really make or break somebody's success in any position. They can have, on paper, technically speaking, be the best salesperson on earth, but if they don't have clear goals for the future, you're never going to see that side of them. It's like having a Ferrari with no gas in the tank.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to walk you through some questions that can get to this question of energy and drive, and also use the structured approach. So we can move on, Chris. So there are 3 questions that we really like. The first of which is, and how are we doing on time here? Maybe we'll only go through 1 or 2 examples instead of all 3. Chris, you can just interrupt me whenever.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So the first one is, what is your ultimate career goal, and what is your plan for achieving this goal? And kind of a follow-up question is, how does this position at such and such company fit into that plan? So some criteria to look out for: good answers will have a clear vision, a strategic plan, a strong connection between their goals and the company's values, and also the opportunities available to them at the company. Whereas bad answers lack clarity, a sense of ambition, a sense of purpose. There's no thoughtful approach to career development or a genuine interest in the company. It's kind of like they haven't really thought about it.
Let me just chime in here, because this goes back to something Alyssa said earlier. I think we've all asked the question, where do you want to be in 5 years and 10 years and all that? And we sort of know what we're looking for. But specifically here, keep in mind, if somebody doesn't have a clear plan, let's say using Alyssa's sales example, if they don't have a clear picture of themselves in the future, they don't have a plan, particularly for improving themselves or gaining more experiences. If you don't have a plan, any road will get you there. Any path will get you there. They'll take any job. Your job is nothing special. It's just a job. But if your job that you're offering fits their plan and they're clear where they're going, this is the energy we're talking about. This is the drive, because they're like, I am excited about this opportunity. I want to learn about this company. And they've probably already done a lot of research into it, but that's the energy and drive. I know where I'm going. I know how I'm going to get there, and nothing is going to get in my way. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, and to give you a sense of what this might sound like in an actual interview response, a good answer might sound something like, oh, my ultimate goal is to become a top performing sales leader. And I know I'm just starting out right now, but I'm dedicated to soaking in as much as I can about sales and leadership in the next few years. I'm definitely attracted to your company's commitment to employee growth and development, and I see this role as an opportunity to really develop my skills, contribute to the growth of your organization, and eventually take on leadership responsibilities as I progress in my career. So it's so clear, you can see it, you can taste it, like they know what they want, they know how they can get it at your company, they've done their research, and they see this as a perfect opportunity for themselves. Whereas somebody who doesn't have a plan, they might just come right out and say it. They may just say, I don't really have a specific plan. I'm open to different opportunities. I'm just going to work hard, see where that gets me. Maybe I'll be a manager in the future, but I really just like to take it day by day. That person, I'm sorry, but they're not gonna,
Mhm.
they're
They're
not
they're
gonna.
not gonna hit the ground running.
Mm-mm. So we can move on to another example, which is asking them, what exactly are you looking for in your next position? What does the ideal situation look like for you? And again, here you want them to paint you a picture of their ideal position, because this is what they've thought, this is what they've dreamt, this is what they like. And that clarity and specificity are key. And you can also follow up with the negative or the opposite. What do you not want to do or hope to avoid in your next position? And this is also important because if they're rattling off a bunch of things that are basically describing the position, you may want to think twice, or you absolutely would want to think twice. So it's equally as important to dig into what they don't want as it is to dig into what they do want.
And again, just to drill the point home, we're measuring here energy and drive. And the reason these are so important is that the good answers that Alyssa's described means that this person's been thinking about this stuff. They have a picture in their head. It's pulling them forward. That's what you want to see. The other person that she described, it, they're willing to go with the flow, do anything, whatever. That may sound good on the surface, but there's no picture in their mind. There's no target they're looking for. They may work out, but as I said, it's a hit the ground running situation. They may not be your top salesman in the first week or 6 months. And that may be fine, but know what you're getting into. And in this way, you can get a good read on this rather hard to measure topic, energy and drive.
Yeah, and this is also really worth considering, if technically speaking, you have somebody who checks all the boxes, but it appears that they're lacking energy and drive compared to another candidate who sufficiently checks the boxes. They have some things to learn, but they have really good energy and drive. They are more likely the better choice because you can develop them, but they're going to hit the ground running. They're going to be hungry to learn. They're going to perform. The other person, again, you're not going to get all of that skill out of them if they just don't have any gas in the tank.
Looks like we have a chat coming up. Oh, I guess that was just Cliff.
That was just giving you a little plug.
Okay, so we'll do one more example and then we'll talk about some general best practices. So again, this is one of the most famous interview questions. Where do you see yourself in the next year? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? And I'll illustrate this one again because the criteria is, more or less the same. It's really about the clarity, the specificity. There's a plan, it's thought out, versus there's no plan. I haven't thought about it. I don't really care. So just to give another sense of how it might sound in an interview, somebody's answer might be, well, in the next year, I plan to deepen my understanding of the company's operation, strengthen my relationship with my colleagues, seek opportunities for professional development. But over the next 5 years, I definitely see myself taking on a leadership role, and really playing a key role in strategic planning and other strategic initiatives in the country, in the company.
You were going to elect you.
So, yeah, again, they know what they want. They're clearly interested in leadership. They're clearly interested in strategic initiatives and really being a transformative person within the company. And that's great. Whereas another person may say something like, in the first year, I'll just learn the job. If in 5 years things are still going well, I'll probably still be here if I like it. I just like to take things day by day, so I don't really know where I'll be. Okay. Again, this is a person who is open to anything. What gives you the confidence that they're going to be loyal to you, that they're going to not jump at the next exciting, interesting opportunity?
And it may not be that simple, but oftentimes you'll hear tropes. Oh, I want to grow in my position. I want to become a leader. I want to be a manager, whatever. But if you listen carefully, they're not giving you anything specific with those answers. Whereas the first example was, I specifically want to get involved with strategic initiatives. I want to help the company grow, whatever. So it's those tropes that people lean on. They've learned that people like those in interviews, so they throw them around, but it's telling us that they probably don't really have the drive, again, to hit the ground running. It may work in the long run, but if you need somebody today to produce, they're probably not your choice.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that, this is the generic answer. Oh, I want to grow. Everybody wants somebody eager to grow, eager to learn. You can do that in virtually any job. So if those are the type of responses you're getting, you may want to follow up with something like, well, what does that growth look like to you? Or what specifically do you want to learn? And then see if you get something more specific, or if they struggle to.
By the way, this is maybe a little bit off topic, but one of my favorite questions is when somebody says, oh, I want to learn, I'm eager to learn, and so forth, is to come back and say, what's the last course you took? What's the last book you read on this subject? What's the last time you attended a webinar online at Paper Trails? But then I've often had people answer those questions. Oh, let's see. I took one last year. I took a course last year, I think. And you'll see there's no action behind their vague statements. It's just that it's a vague statement.
So I just want to reiterate here can you just go back one real quick, Chris? Thanks. How the structure comes into play. So I know we kind of jumped to the topic of energy and drive, but if we're following the structure, we have energy and drive is our expectation, right? So the questions related to energy and drive that we're going to ask follow. And here we went a little black and white just to try to make the point, but I recommend having a 3-point scale. So you'd have something here in the middle where you could, basically you have your poor performer, your mediocre, and then someone who exceeds the expectations, so to speak. But you have that predetermined criteria spelled out already. So you can see how all 3 aspects of the structure come into play. And then we can move on. So I just want to wrap up with some best practices. Again, as we stressed in the beginning, preparation is key, planning is key. This structured approach takes time and thought, but it certainly pays off in the long run. And not to mention, once you do it once, you can essentially reuse it. You're not necessarily reinventing the wheel every time unless your expectations change substantially. And part of that preparing includes preparing the expectations, preparing the questions, defining the criteria for how you're going to evaluate the responses. And the reason I refer to them as anchors here is because they need to be there before the interview. They're anchored. So none of this wishy-washy, but it's to keep you on track. And again, it's something that pays off in the long run. And so by default of having this all predetermined, you're asking the same questions to all of the candidates in the same order. This makes for a very fair and legal process. There's no room to, there's no gray area there. And on a different note, this is just a general tip for interviewing, is letting the candidate speak and not using most of the time for yourself. It's not uncommon for people to overshare, well, in this position, we need somebody who da da da. And how would you handle that? Or what would you do? Well, you've just told them everything that you expect. So what they're going to do is just regurgitate your words, and you're going to be very pleased with that
And by the way,
response. So
that's probably the most powerful reason to have the questions written out, because when you get to the period, you stop. And if
yeah,
you're a little nervous in the interview, or you're not sure where the next question's coming from, and you're trying to think about the next question, and you keep telling the client or the candidate, basically you're spoon feeding them. This is how you get the job. Tell me you're interested in teamwork. Tell me you're interested in learning more. So that's another good reason for planning them out and writing the questions out in advance.
yeah. And some people, especially extroverts, don't like silence. And so it's not uncommon to ask a question, wait 1 millisecond, and if the person is not already answering, to rephrase or ask follow-up, or something to fill the silence. But you have to remember that not everybody's that quick on their feet. Just because they don't have an answer right off the bat doesn't mean that they won't have a good answer, or they are making something up. Maybe they're taking a second to think of a situation, so give them a moment to process, and don't take that in a negative way, because that is, again, another example of the behavioral bias.
Yes,
Which
exactly.
we're trying to avoid. And finally, as I said, involving multiple interviewers is always a good thing if you can do it. And again, this process, it helps get you on the same page. But it's also nice to have multiple interviewers, because while one person can be focusing on the words that they're saying, another person could maybe be observing their body language or their behavior or their stress signals, because all of those things can factor into an evaluation as well. So,
And by the way, the one thing I would add here, you'll read all kinds of different articles about interviewing. I've read some that say, oh, avoid multiple viewers. I think there's good reason to have multiples. However, again, knowing that these questions are all pre-planned, you know exactly what the structure is. Make sure that the questions are assigned. That way you don't have, if you got multiple interviewers who don't know why they're there, that's when you start to get into poor interview questions, and by default, you're going to make a poor hiring decision. So have the questions prearranged, know who's going to ask what. You might have the salesperson concentrate on the sales-oriented questions, and the finance person concentrated on the numbers-oriented questions. But the structure goes all through the system.
yes.
Speaking of questions, there's about 500 people in the audience, so there must be some questions, right, Chris?
Yeah, we've got some good folks here. Certainly, I mean, I'll speak to the fact that, Art and Alyssa have really helped us here at Paper Trails over the last 6 months or so, really define our hiring process and interview process. And that has come with, helping with this interview piece, but also when we go through our interviews, what this leads up to is a hiring assessment. And that assessment, quite frankly, I've taken it, and I have no idea how Art and Alyssa come up with the conclusions they do based on the assessment that we took. But I promise you, when the assessment hit my desk, it was me to a T. So, certainly, understanding, and it has a lot to do with the drive and desire for growth. And certainly, I think all of us as employers are really trying to find that, because I know I personally have fallen many times for, this candidate's super nice, And of course,
Mhm.
they would succeed. But then, they've used this analogy a couple times. The gas is not in the tank, or our values don't align, and
Mhm.
our mutual goals don't align, so it's not going to fit well. So I think the first part of this is, and when we talked about this webinar, Art and Alyssa both said, well, this is the first part of the process, and then the second part is the assessment. And I think I want to fill that in and make sure that that's understood. Is that what really Alyssa and Art do is these assessments, but it leads up to is led up to by conducting good interviews and making sure that we have good candidates coming on board, so, which we know is harder than ever these days.
One thing you mentioned, if somebody's going to ask a question here, I'll just stop. But you mentioned knowing, they align with your behaviors and also your values. Values are those things that it's hard to put a value in a job description, but that's another good example of where expectations are important. I expect you to treat our customers as the most important people on the planet. Maybe another company says, I expect you to treat the customers good enough so they come back and spend more money. It might not be quite that blunt and obvious, but values are a great source of expectations. So you may think about that when you're building out your interview questions. You're too close to the forest. You might not see all the trees, but think of it in terms of what are your values? What are your deep held beliefs? Those are good candidates for expectations that need to be baked into your interview and your hiring selection process.
Absolutely. So I did share in the notes in the chat a little bit about strategic talent management, and Art and Alyssa particularly. They have a great podcast as well, and certainly they send out some really great insights each week in their newsletter. So certainly feel free to reach out to them if you have any questions. We're always available, happy to make an introduction. I'm hoping that this was valuable. I don't see any active questions, but certainly if something pops up later today, if you're sitting at the dinner table tonight and you say, gosh, I should have thought about that, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to connect you and get those answered. So, and I'm extremely grateful to Alyssa and Art for joining us, hoping that everyone found some value today, and thank you very much. So.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everybody who attended.
All righty. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you next month.
Take care.